Welcome back, everybody. This part is the part I've been waiting for since Alia said yes. And I was reading, I'm lucky enough that, yay, she picked me to be on the launch team with other people. So I've been able to read the book. And one of the parts in Glorious Weakness that I love is what you talk about is, when you talk about this part where you talk about struggling with the word calling. And as I said, I didn't grow up a Christian. So it was like when I did become at the, end of my teens kind of thing, I didn't know all the right words or the things that people use. Like that wasn't in my vernacular, like it wasn't a thing. And where you write here, where calling feels like a cruel joke when you're hurting or suffering, when you're weary or poor or ill, when you're confused or struggling in your faith, when you're weak and it sounds like another to-do that you can't manage. And I was like, what? Yes. But I felt like I could never tell anybody that it bugged me or irritated me, because then that wouldn't be very godly, would it?
Right.
And then you go on to talk about, I don't want to read the whole book, but I could. So I prefer to think of calling as telling the truth about God, bearing witness to the world in the ways unique to us and our story. And then you go on for a little bit, and I'm not going to read it because you guys need to buy the book to read that. But in the part that it just says, this is my ministry of weakness. And I was like, bam. Yes. So I would just love to hear, like what you were thinking about that, and how you experience God and still cling on to God when clearly you've gone through so many things. And I mean, this is something that, we know God could heal, but do we know for sure it's going to happen?
Right.
No. And what do we do with that in the meantime?
Yeah, I think for me, I remember thinking about calling when I first became a Christian. My parents were missionaries, so I was a missionary kid, and then we came back to the States and went through all this stuff. And so then when I finally became a Christian in my teens, I reverted back to all of those sort of idealistic, the missionary biographies and things that I had grown up with. And some of that was this very idealistic way of how we live out our faith. And so this idea of calling comes up, and what are we called to do? And everybody at that time, especially in our groups, were like, what is my calling? And we're all like waiting to hear the big adventure that God has to like. And I think at that time, it was starting to shift to a lot of the radical, like, how are you going to live like a extreme life for Jesus? Now the pendulum swung back to like, how do we live an ordinary life for Jesus? Or like a simple life for Jesus. But at that time it was like, how do we, live our lives in this radical sort of way? And so the emphasis was really there for me. And then I got married, and we thought we were going to go to missions, and then I got sick, and then I was sick for 20 years, and we didn't do any of the things that I thought I was called to do. And so there was a period of time where, I was grieving, I was mourning the loss of like these things. And I remember thinking, God, you gave me all of this like passion about, I can speak and I can write and I can, or whatever the things are. And yet you've limited me. I can't actually do any of them, like, because I'm, sick, or because I'm not able, or because my capacity is too short. And so I remember thinking, why did you make me this way with all these things? And then, plot me in this life where I can't use any of them. And it was a number of years in that space of like, what am I even doing? I'm not really living out my calling unless I'm doing these other things, but I can't do those other things. So like, there's no place for me, right, in the body of Christ, because I can't do all of those things, or at least at that time with my health. And I think there's a lot of people that feel that way, right? This is just another to do, and I'm sick and I'm tired, and like, I can barely survive. And now but I'm supposed to be doing some great thing for God. And this, living out my great calling in my life. And so there was a period before that I wrote the book where I was invited to speak at a couple of places, and I was doing a session on the art of truth telling as far as writing goes. And I remember thinking, this is going to be great. I'm going to write out, practice, and we'll do this speaking session. And I just got slammed with all of this stuff ahead of time. I had multiple surgery. I have physical illness as well, chronic things that flare up. And so I had kidney surgery. I think 2 surgeries. I had asthma. So I was in and out of, so I went through all of this stuff, was just sick for a really long time. And then like, right before I was supposed to, I thought I'm going to have to cancel. I can't go to speak. And right before I was supposed to go, I had like 2 weeks of like, or about a week and a half of like health. Like I was fine. And I was like, okay, I guess I'll go. But then I was also like, I have not prepared because I've been sick for this long. And I don't have all of my normal prep time, and I'm not polished, and I'm not together, and I'm not where I want to be to stand up in front of this crowd and give this message, And I just felt like, okay, well, like I feel bad backing out, and like this close to whatever. And so I showed up, and I showed up in abject weakness. I mean, we literally drove. So one of the speaking things was in Portland. I drove with a friend in my minivan, and I had just been through all of this stuff, and we literally pull into the outskirts of town, and we get hit by a truck. Like right before that, I'm like, so I had asked people to pray, and I'm like, I literally just got hit by a truck. Like our back end got, so there was a point where you're just like, this is almost comical, but also it totally sucks. But I got up to speak, and I used to speak a lot, and so I used to be very comfortable, but I felt very uncomfortable. I felt very vulnerable, very naked. Got up and spoke, and I think the Holy Spirit just had room. I don't know if that makes sense, but it was definitely not me like performing. It was just me open to share the things that God was doing in my life, and it wasn't some huge like. And then there was no there's no performative part to it. It was just, this is where I'm at, and this is how God shows up in my life, and this is how he's good to me in the midst of all of this stuff. And I remember thinking afterwards, because there's people coming up and talking to me at, I did 2 different ones, but anyway, I had people coming up to me and just like bawling and like talking and sharing different things about their life. And I thought that was just like 100% not me. Like that wasn't me. Like I couldn't have prepped for that. It wouldn't have been the same. And God needed me to be sort of desperate for him. And that's when he showed up too. I mean, not that he wasn't there, but like that feeling of being like, this is the message that God has given me. It's burning a hole in my gut, and this is what I have to offer. And it's that feeling of like, it's really not much, but God multiplies what we bring. And I think I really, really felt that in that time. And so after that, I started thinking a lot, like, what if my spiritual gift is just weakness? Like, I mean, that was really the thing that just stuck in my head. I'm like, that, like other people have all these other spiritual gifts, but I show up always just like weak. Like I'm always sick, or I'm struggling, or I'm, there's always something that's lacking. And I started thinking like, maybe that's my gift to the church, is to show up weak and to say, that's okay. And that God, is with us in this, and he's good in this. And the problems don't all get fixed, and I'm not healed, and we're still struggling financially, and there's no, the bow doesn't tie up nicely, and yet God is faithful, and he's good in this place, and this is what it looks like. And so it's a bearing witness to a God who is good despite the circumstances that would say otherwise. And I remember thinking like, maybe that's the message. Like maybe that's the message for me. And then I started thinking, maybe that's the message for everybody, and we just don't like want to admit that that's really what God desires. And so I started looking into blessed are the poor in spirit. And I remember thinking, what the heck is being poor in spirit? Because I felt like it really resonated with me. I'm like, I feel poor in spirit, whatever that is. Like I feel like I get it, and so that was kind of the journey that I started on. That was the exploration of the start of this book, is some of those questions, some of those experiences. So.
Wow. I love that. I think my spiritual gift is being a hot mess.
Yeah. They're kind of interchangeable.
it's interesting, and I want to know if you found this too, that once I started sharing,
Mm-hmm.
and once I kind of let people into, some of the things that happen, or sometimes when I speak, I walk people through an anxiety attack.
Mm-hmm.
Like it's that kind of thing. And just because I assume that people would know what that would feel like, because they say anxiety, it's like, well, do you have an anxiety disorder?
Yeah.
Like, did you lose your mind in the toothpaste aisle?
Right.
I don't know. But I found that the more that I started sharing, the more people, the more people related to me, the more, like, I had done certain, quote unquote ministries in the church, and I had done a lot of things. I always felt like the question asker and the boundary pusher, but they still let me in and do things. But I found the more I was that, the more I feel Jesus in the mess and in the gray. And I almost wonder if I wasn't, what I say, a hot mess, if I would be the person that I am. Like, I think I would probably not be as nice or as as understanding, not nice all the time, but to certain people groups, right? Like the struggling, poor. I can relate to people that would start, like, I know that I would have an addictive personality so I don't try things, because I know, right, that I could get obsessed. And so I really found that freeing when I read that in your book. And it surprises me, the people that I was most worried about, because some of my baggage is, well, I didn't, grow up in the church, and this elusive, godly woman, I don't think I am that, and I'm definitely not submissive.
Yeah.
But I found that some of the people that I thought would judge me or would not want to hang out with me, that I had been, doing things for years with, felt free to share things. And it hasn't always gone well, but how did your community, and I don't know if you were going to church at the time, or your kind of faith community, if you weren't sick, what kinds of reactions, both good and bad, have you experienced?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's both good and bad. So I've had people that are very supportive. I think, I talk in my book about honesty as our invitation. I think there is a place where we make room for other people by sharing our stories. I write pretty specifically. I write very specifically about my life or my marriage. I'm not trying to necessarily make it broad. And what's interesting is that people find themselves in those very specific stories. They still relate to parts of it. And so what I think, there's a connection that people have to, just to the humanity that we all share, to the things that we all go through. And I 100% know that I would not be the person that I am had I not gone through this, desperate sort of brokenness. I remember my sister-in-law in my early 20s, she used to joke, and they would call me the ice queen, because I never cried. It was very black and white. I remember taking a spiritual gifts test, and I scored 0 on mercy. 0. Like, if there could have been a negative, it probably would have been me. And I was just like, people make their choices, and, but I was also in a hypomanic stage and had everything together. And I was, like, I can do everything. I don't know why you can't do everything. And, you just need to make better choices. And I was very much that person. Mm-hmm. I had a very, very obedient child. I was extremely legalistic. I was, you just have to do all of this stuff. And then, and so there was a period in my 20s where I was extremely judgmental, and I did not like people, like not pretty much anybody. I wasn't a very friendly person. I was very much like the speak the truth in love, but love was really like, I'm going to bash you over the head with scripture. Like I was definitely that person. It's like, I'm going to stand up for what's true. And, if I scar you emotionally, you just need to make better choices. Like, so that was really me. I really had that heart. And so people that hear that about me now are like, what? Um, because there was a humbling that happened in the brokenness. And I think when we grasp hold of the magnitude of God's grace for us, realizing I can be laying in my bed and not able to get up, not able to do anything, and like I'm still adored and beloved by God. Like I don't have to perform, I don't have to pretend, like he loves me. Nothing that I can do is ever going to change that. And so once you grasp that grace, I really do think it changes the way that we see the world. It changes the way that we interact with other people, because we realize like we've been loved beyond our, beyond anything that we can even imagine. And you start to have more understanding for the ways that people hurt, and the ways that people struggle, and the ways that people experience God, and have different stories. And it softens you, in those ways. And so I do think like that's a huge aspect of the brokenness, of the mental illness, of the sickness. Like I have a lot more compassion for people who struggle, and I didn't have that before. I was going to save them, but not like them. That was my thing. So,
funny, not funny, right?
Yeah.
Wow. Yeah. I find, I feel like the more that I'm looking, the more I realize like Jesus hung out with the suffering and the ill, and that way more. Like I feel like he would totally he would hang out with me.
Yeah.
And I sure. once I kind of realized that, because everything seemed, unattainable to me, and I had to quiet down a bit. I had to, and it's not like I became meek or demure. And so I thought, well, I still speak my mind. I still ask questions. And I mean, I go as far to say, not grateful, but one of the things that I like about, the hypomanic, even depression, that it forces me, like, I'm too scared not to say the thing, and I will obsess and it will eat at me or whatever, that overrides the fear of saying the thing, like of actually saying the thing. Yeah. Will I go home and obsess about it later? Probably. I'm probably thinking about how 3 years ago I said something dorky, and they probably think I'm lame. Like, they don't even remember. Who cares? Yeah. But I think that it's actually, in some kind of weird way, made me brave. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I can see that. I think for me, I mean, honestly, people tell me I'm brave all the time, and I'm like, I'm just really tired. I'm like, I am at that point in tired where I just don't care. I don't have enough energy to bother to pretend. So like, it's just what it is, And so, yeah, I mean, maybe there's bravery there, but I like, honestly, I'm like, I'm just very, very tired.
Yeah.
Tired makes me honest.
Yeah, no, I love that. And I find, do you find, this is something interesting that I wanted to know, with like your blog, and now I guess it will be with your book too, do you find that people send more private messages, or do you find that they like
a million to one?
Yeah.
It's actually one of the reasons that I write so infrequently. Because the response to certain pieces of work are lots of emails, and now it's everywhere, right? Before they would there would be one way they'd contact you in your contact form, was kind of how it was. And so when I first started blogging and I'd write, I would just have all these emails, and I would just go through them, and I would read them, and I would respond, But now it's like,
oh no,
there's like Instagram messages, and there's Twitter DMs, and then there's like the comments, and then there's like people that are commenting on your timeline, and there's people that are in your inbox, and then there's like Voxer messages. And so sometimes I'm like, I know I missed people, I don't know, so it can be a lot. And I feel like I don't know what that's going to look like long term, because I do think that I probably we'll have to figure out a way to better manage some of that. But I think that a lot of, like I said, a lot of people don't share that these are things that they struggle with outwardly, but they pull you aside and say, I remember going to church, and there was a woman that came up to me and pulled me aside and said, "Oh, I read your post about anxiety, and I've struggled with it my whole life." And she's like an older woman, very together. I just, like in my head, I was like, I would never think that about her, like that she's struggled with this her entire life, and that she's never really told anybody because, or whatever. And so I realized, like, okay, there are a lot of people that that are going through these things, and that they want a place to connect and to feel heard and to feel understood and to feel like they're just, they're thankful. Like I get a lot of those, and that's really, a lot of times I'm writing these when I'm depressed too. Like I write a lot of times when I'm still kind of in the muck of it. And I know because I've written so much that God is faithful, but there's times when I write and I like, it may be real. I hope it is. Like I have hope and I have faith that it's real, but like, I don't feel God anywhere. Like this could all just be a joke, and sometimes I write in that space because that's a space that's very realistic for people that struggle with depression. And so sometimes during those times I'll get, emails from people that are like, in those spaces too and feeling those things too. And it's, those things are really encouraging. It's encouraging. We don't always get to see the impact of our lives. Sometimes God is extremely merciful and he'll show you this like little glimpse behind the curtain. That's happened a lot recently with like this book, is to see like this little glimpse of like, this is something that God has worked. And it's not through me, it's through his goodness and his grace that he has allowed like this to happen. And this has touched and impacted it in this way. And every once in a while you get to see that, you get to that email that says, this really mattered to me, or this saved my life, or this changed me. And especially as a writer, author, like there's nothing better than that. But it is something that I have to think about, how to steward a writing platform where you are somebody that gets a lot of those things. And I haven't quite figured it out yet. I don't know if I have a great balance. It might just be that I write less, and that's okay.
Yeah, I was thinking about that. I don't even blog. I talk and
right.
blog and that kind of thing. But even sometimes, like I find, whereas the other posts, people will talk.
Right.
And I find that some people are like, I was scared to even like it because
right.
Of the stigma there, which makes me keep going. But I do take on stuff. So I have a really smart, wise friend, Nicole, that's helping me, but there's sometimes when I can't. So I'm trying to come up with something, which I bet you'll have to do with your book, like, because you only have so much energy and that kind of thing, to give a message to show people that they're cared about, but you can't be their person.
Right. Yeah.
I end up and have in the past, and it's really like either triggered me or not sometimes, taking on too much, and then I feel like there's no one else that's going to be their person, so I have to be their person, and then I have to be a good person, and and I haven't figured out any of this. How can I be a good person, right?
I don't have a strong I don't have a super strong people pleasing like aspect to me. I'm pretty okay if people like just don't, like, if they don't like me, then I'm like, well, so that's actually good. That's something that I think I've grown in. But my thing, I remember going to a conference and I was getting lots of, it was a writing conference, and I was getting lots of emails that were people that were readers and said, hey, I would love to meet up with you and have coffee, which is great, except for when there's like 40 of them. And I'm like, there's no way that I can sit down and have deep conversations with 40 different people. And so my thing is like, I can say no, and I feel fine about that. And I don't care if in their head they go, gosh, she's so stuck up and she won't make time for me. Like, I'm like, well, I know that's not true. And so they don't like me, whatever. But I am very sensitive to people, because I think this is something that I've struggled with a lot. I'm very sensitive to people who will then think, she doesn't want to spend time with me because I'm not good enough, or I'm not, like when it's an internal thing, like if they just push it on me and they don't like me, I'm like, whatever. But if it's internalized for them, like, I'm not important enough to make time for her, I'm not somebody that's worthy of being seen, or like that that burden is something that I weigh a lot in this role, because I am sharing things that people connect to in different ways. And a lot of the people, I was thinking a lot about like the reader, just in everything, like even in what we send out to, like when we were sending out the boxes to the launch team, they were talking about like a candle. And I'm like, okay, but I have highly sensitive people in there. I know so some of them are going to be really affected by scent. And, so I don't want to do anything that, so there was a lot of things that went into like, how do we do this in a way that cares for like the person, and for all of the things that could be, that a lot of people that don't struggle with these things don't ever think about. Right. But, how do I steward a space? And I don't have all the answers to that yet, but I do think that it's a good thing to wrestle with when you're in this kind of, I don't know, like ministry or it's not like leadership, but like, I don't know, when you're this kind of person that people look to in some kind of capacity, I think it's a good thing to wrestle with that burden and what does it look like to steward a space well and to care for your readers. And I think, when I was writing this book, I mean, that was like the driving thing is I care about my readers. I care about, and if other people outside of like that kind of like target group, like read it, that's great. I want them to. But when I was writing it, I had very specifically in my head, this is who I'm writing it for. This is what they feel. This is what they go through. This is what they struggle with. This is what they think about themselves when they're lying in bed at night and they're alone with God. This is what they think about when they can't get out of bed and they're depressed. This is what they think about when, and so I had this ongoing sort of dialogue with the words on the page and with this reader who's sort of this amalgamation of all of these different actual readers. And I know a lot of my readers have been with me for years, and I know parts of their stories, and I know things that they struggle, I know their names. And I'm sure there's other people that read me that, I don't know anything about, but which was actually shocking to me when I was like, there are readers that I don't know. Like I was like, I thought I knew all of them. So that was interesting. But I do think that, that's a struggle to have. I think that we really need to think about. I think sometimes in the like Christian blogosphere, speaking, celebrity, whatever, it can be all about like, this is the message that I have to give. And I think that that's important, to steward in a way that always remembers that these are actual people. And obviously I can't be everybody's person. Yeah. And sometimes, like for the conference, I said, I'm going to be here at this time and everybody can come. Like, this is the coffee place. It will be like, everybody that wants to come can come this time, and that's just the reality of like, that's setting boundaries for me. And, even with the launch team, I had a lot of people email me and say, I really want to be on the launch team, but I'm just not physically doing well, or I'm not mentally doing well. And I love that I'm supporting your book and I love your message and I really want to be on it, but I just can't. And I thought, I love that. I love that they're setting boundaries for their health. Even in the launch team, I'm like, if you can't do everything, like, that's okay. Cause I can't either. I mean? Like, yeah. I get it, life happens. You get sick kids, you're sick, like things come up, and I'm going through my life right now, same as everybody. I'm dealing with stuff in my life. And so I want there always to be that measure of grace for people, because I need it too, so.
Yeah. When you were writing the book, how were you doing health-wise? And did it affect your health? And I love that you said you had a purpose, because I know that sometimes, I don't know how you experience bipolar, but sometimes I'm either hyper-focused or I can't decide because I want to do all the things. And I mean, I'm a 7, a 4 might be different that way, but how did you, 1, keep your focus, and 2, like, were you healthy, or were you writing it from a place of not healthy?
Yeah, no, I was not healthy the entire time. Literally from the very beginning, when I started to decide that this is something that I feel like God is like, I feel like there's something that I want to say here, and I feel like this is maybe the time, and all of that stuff. I started working on my book proposal. I think I write about in the book, and it was like literally like a week later, my mom broke her back in our backyard. She had a compost bin fall on her and her back broke. And so I was taking care of her. And while I was taking care of her, I'm supposed to be writing this proposal and I was all focused. And then all of a sudden I'm taking care of her. And there was a lot of other, stuff with insurance and money and being seen, and the doctors were treating her horrible. And I'm trying to advocate for her, but she's in a ton of pain. And then I started going through like a mixed bipolar state, and it was all the stress and lack of sleep. And so I'm like losing my mind, trying to take care of my mom, thinking I should probably be like in a psych ward, but I can't because I've got too much stuff to do. It was like that kind of thing. And so I didn't have a regular psychiatrist at that time, so my meds weren't regulated, and I was trying to get in with somebody. And it kind of just went like that for the remainder of the book writing. I mean, it was just the amount of things. I could write an entire other book of just like, this is all the stuff that happened while I was writing this book. And I remember thinking, God, I have enough material. Like, I do not need more material, like, for this book. I don't need more. Like, I already cut a ton of it. And because it's just so much, but crazy stuff. I had months of really severe asthma. I lost my voice multiple times. I couldn't breathe. I was stuck inside because there were forest fires, so I couldn't leave my house for a lot of times. My oxygen, my saturation was super low. I had to go to the doctor. We don't have medical insurance, so huge medical bills. I got bit by a black widow that was in my bra, right? Like, who does that even happen to? And I remember going to I waited for 6 days because I thought, there's nothing, they don't give anti-venom or what, like they don't do that. So unless like it's infected or whatever, there's not much they can do. So I thought I'll just treat it at home. But then my muscles started getting rigid. I was like, I should probably go to the doctor. So I went in and they had to like excise the wound, and the doctor had like the med students come in and look at this wound on my boob because it's so rare to see a real like black widow bite. Right.
Oh my goodness.
And so I have this giant like wound that they have to like excise and pack, and like, I mean, it was just like crazy. So then I'm super sick, and I'm like, I mean, there was just so many things. My ankle went out. I have an ankle injury, so I was like limping around the house, and so there was a point I remember, and then I had a very extreme sort of hypomanic phase, and then several very deep depressions that I think had a lot to do with just like self-care, like sleep and stress, and writing a book is I'd get up at 5:30 in the morning to write before my kids were up because I'm still living my life. Like, I'm not, still got stuff to do. And I think all of that, just kind of triggered some bigger mood things, and then switching meds because I have other issues. So I have to do blood work every 6 months, and my blood work came back bad, and they're like, we need to kind of switch you because we're worried because you have these other conditions. So it was a nightmare. And I remember thinking, it was after I was done writing the book, I remember thinking how I had pictured it. I really pictured this idea, and this ties into the message of the book. I really pictured this idea of I'm being faithful, therefore God will, lower this bubble wrap down around me, and my life will be like smooth sailing while I write this book for him. Right? Like, that's kind of what I thought in my head. And then it just wasn't that. It was, I wrote this book sick and weak and desperate, and that's the book that needed to be written. And I don't know that I could have written this book, even though I'd been through all of that stuff and I knew what I was going to say. The fact that I was writing it in a desperate place really made that message kind of hit home in a different sort of way, because there's just no way that I could have finished it. I mean, I was very, very much relying on God and his strength, and I was as weak as I could feel writing the book, very emptied out. And it's an emotional book, so like even that, just there's a toll that it costs something, to write, and then when you're also physically and mentally kind of all over the place. So it was not healthy during the writing of the book. I literally, it's not healthy.
I was wondering, I think you allude to it in the book as well, and kind of when you were writing on encourage and things like that. But I remember thinking, like, because the words, like how you put words around things, I'm like, I never knew I thought that. And she just wrote it, and she was wordsy with her words and beautiful. So I was like, you must be feeling some of this right
Yeah.
now. Like who can do that?
Right.
Was,
Well, I am an Enneagram 4, so I always feel a lot of feelings, and I can pretty much summon feelings like at will. But it was that, you know, that is the bonus for that part. But yeah, it was, I mean, I was going through all of that as I was writing this book. And it was a reminder to me too. Like, I talk in the book about writing the reminders, because you're not always going to feel God's presence. You're not always going to feel like he's good. You're not always going to feel like he's faithful. And I have these sort of altars to remember and to look back on when I'm feeling like it's all lies. It can't be true. God can't be good, because look at how bad it is right now. And it's, you know, it's that reminder, like he's here, he's been faithful, he's been present. And each one, I'm not going to say it gets easier, but I think you start to sort of get muscle memory, and I can snap back faster in terms of faith and of hope, and can cling to it a little bit easier now, because I've had a lot of practice in the hard times to say, you know, this is really hard, but I know God's here, and I can't see him because it's dark, but I know he's present, you know. So
yeah, like you talked about reaching out in the dark. I find I'm much quicker to grab, like grabbing the cloak or grabbing the
right.
Because before it's, I could do this, or I'm
right.
it's not that bad, or
you
know, sometimes I get stuck in, you know, people have it worse, and then it's like, you need help, like you need a lot of help. Well, I was going to ask you what your greatest hope for glorious weakness in your book is, but I think that and I'd love to still ask you, but I think that you talked a lot about it when you were talking about who you were writing it for. But what is it's April 2nd, right?
Right? Yeah, so like 2.5 weeks, I think.
It's so exciting.
It's so weird. I'm like, I have a book in the world. Like it's cool, and also so weird.
You can do those things where when you go, you could do like the signing of
I know. That sounds terrifying. My worst fear is just sitting at a table like all by myself with like stacks of books and like my little banner behind me. I'm just like, that sounds horrible.
Just text me. I'll come. We're best friends now, remember? I'll come.
Have my back.
So is that your greatest hope for the book, to talk to the people that are suffering and in the dark and remind them? Is that your greatest hope?
Yeah, you know, one of my endorsers said something along the lines of, you know, this book heals as much as it cuts, or, you know, that for some people this will be uncomfortable, and I think that is my hope. Like I want it to do what it's supposed to do for different people. She said, you know, for some people it will be this balm, and that was who I was thinking about when I was writing it. But I also think that, you know, I have hopes for this book to challenge the church and some of the ideas that we have about what it looks like to be faithful, what it looks like to be, you know, successful, what it looks like to be, you know, part of this body that is recognizing the power of weakness, and recognizing what, you know, this concept, what does it mean to be poor in spirit? It's not something we talk about. It's not something we really esteem as this huge thing. Nobody wants to be poor. Nobody wants to need a bunch of stuff. And in fact, if you do, you're typically looked on as the church is like, you haven't done something right in the steps of doing all the right things. And they don't typically elevate the people to, you know, ministry or leadership that are a hot mess. Like, I mean, most of the time, like, they're, you know, they might give you a side job and you're like the sidekick, but you're not the person, right? Because people want the story that ends with the success. People want the story that says, this is what I went through, and now I'm on this other side. And my story is not that, and may never be that. And a lot of people's aren't. And so what does it look like to hear those stories and to esteem God's hand in our lives, no matter what our lives look like, you know? And so I think my hope for the book is, yes, that it would be a balm and a comfort for those who are struggling and are hurting and who just can't do one more thing. You know, they just can't. And they see God as distant, or they see God as, you know, that they don't feel beloved because they feel like their lives are too hard, or they don't feel like they have anything to offer the church. I want them to know that they do. They have a huge impact, and that our weakness can be a huge gift to those around us.
Yeah.
And then for those who have never thought about it, I would like them to be shaken up a little bit. You know, I would like them to be uncomfortable. I would like people to read it and think, you know, that it's convicting, and that there are parts in it, I think, you know, that I've heard back from people, like, I've never thought about it this way, or I've never seen it this way. Like, I love that. And I hope that it does both, depending on where people are at, you know, so
Wow.
that's my hope. I hope it does a little bit of good.
Yeah. It's both. I would agree with that person, because it's comforting, and I can take like a deep breath when I read it, but I can also see it as like stigma smashing for sure, and educating in, with the power of your words. So yeah, well, I am so excited about it, and we will have all the links in this post, and I think you should all go and buy it for all your friends, please, because and it was one of those books that I could honestly say that I was sad when it was over, because I wanted to keep reading. So now I'm like, ooh, audiobook.
Yeah.
So, and you're going to be reading it, right?
Yeah, so it's not going to come out right on launch day, but anybody that pre-orders the book will get a download. And part of that is just because of me. I wasn't able to they wanted me to record in LA for 5 days, and I was like, can't do it health-wise and life-wise. So because that's the case, it's not going to release right on April 2nd, but it will release, I think, about a month afterwards. So anybody that pre-orders up to April 1st, they can go to my blog, and there's a little link that says claim your pre-order. And so anybody that pre-orders will automatically get the audiobook free. I am going to read it. And so then they'll have that too, if they want to.
Well, that's a good reminder.
Babylon.
No, I have to do that. I'm excited about that. And I'm excited that you're reading it, because sometimes it's a little weird.
Yeah. At first I was like, I don't really want to read it. Like, well, there are parts I'm like, I don't know if I can get through that part without crying. You know, like there's 2 parts in the book that every time I read them aloud to like my mom, or I read it aloud to my daughter, I just start bawling, and I'm like, ah. And then also like I was like, I was sick so much with the asthma that I was like, I don't even know if I can, like, I can't breathe. So I definitely can't talk for 6.5 hours. But so many people were like, please read. And then I was thinking about, like, my other author friends were like, it's so weird, especially memoir, because it's so personal. Like, to have some random person like read, I'm like, what if she doesn't say it right? You know, like get the right accents or the right places that it's supposed to be. So I am going to do it myself, and hopefully it will be okay. So, yeah.
Wow. Well, bravo, new best friend. It's really, your ministry of weakness is really freeing a lot of us, and I thank you for it, and I am going to be putting it in all the places. So, and I would I just want to say thank you so much.
Thank you so much for having me. It's really fun. Thanks for being on my lunch team.
Thanks for picking
me. It's fun.
Fun. I've never done it before. It feels
I know that I'm like, I hate marketing, but I love my launch team. So I'm like, I would do this part again.
Yeah, right? It's just, you feel like you're part of something even more exciting.
So, it's really cool.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, I'm sure I will talk to you online soon.
Yes.
And thanks again.
Thank you.